Hey everyone, this is Coach Phoenix.
And I'm Coach Gina.
And this is Toast with the Coaches. Cheers.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of Perspective, the show where we drink, talk about life, the universe, and all that other jazz.
And again, I'm Coach Phoenix, founder and CEO of Role Model Life Coaching, where we focus on life transitions. At Role Model Life Coaching, we partner with our clients to travel down the road of life towards their model self.
And again, I am Coach Gina. I am a certified life coach and founder of Clear Focus Coaching. I specialize in boundaries coaching, setting limits with those around you so you can make space for you. I also specialize in empowering women. I help women to recognize their strength and potential in work, life, and relationships so they can face every day with confidence and intention.
So this episode is going to be a powerful one. I would like to raise a toast. I would like to raise a toast for awareness, raising awareness to modern day slavery. I would like to raise a toast to fight against human and sex trafficking and the voices who make a difference. I would like to raise a toast to switch. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hey, how you doing? So today we have Zaina Greene from Switch. How you doing today, Zaina?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're doing well. We're doing well. We're doing very well. Thank you for joining us. So before we get into the meat of it and you telling us your story and helping us raise awareness to this very important topic, can you briefly discuss who you are, your role, and exactly the Switch, like who's the organization?
Yeah, so like you said, my name is Zaina Greene. I'm the executive director of Switch, and we are an anti-trafficking organization in the Upstate of South Carolina working to fight human trafficking and sexual exploitation. I also serve as the co-chair of the Upstate Human Trafficking Task Force here in South Carolina as well.
Nice. That's awesome. Can you tell me a little bit more about your coaching position? I didn't know that was part of what you do. What do you do in that role?
Yeah, that's a role that's appointed by the community. So the Attorney General's office basically has a human trafficking task force for the state, and then there's regional task forces where different people are chairing those. And so basically by the regional task force, I was voted in as one of the co-chair along with someone else. And I've been doing that for about 3 years now.
Wow.
Okay, nice. Because Gina and I, we're both certified life coaches. Do y'all go to some type of like certification, or how does that play out?
When it comes to the co-chair role, it really has to do probably more with the way we're combating trafficking already in the community and seen as someone who is, I guess, kind of like an expert in the field or has been working in the field for a while and is able to bring collaboration with the rest of the community so that we can all work together to help fight this thing. So I think that's a lot of what they're looking for when we're doing that. And then, of course, like for me personally, I do a lot of regional and national trainings to stay up to date with what's going on with this issue.
Can you briefly go into like, as far as Switch, was the organization started? When was it started? And on what premise, like why was it started?
Yeah, so we started as a very grassroots organization, zero money in the bank account, but a lot of passionate people. And so the reality was we knew trafficking was happening. We knew that women that were in the sex industry that could be part of trafficking was being overlooked. And so really just that recognition of this is happening here, no one is doing anything and somebody needs to. And so really it was so grassroots that it was people who didn't even know each other that started to connect because we cared about this issue. And eventually Switch was basically formed. And the idea of Switch is honestly turning the light on the dark issue of trafficking. That's why where we got our name from. And basically from there, we went from being volunteers that worked, full-time hours for free for several years until we got to the point that we were an established, legitimate organization that actually can have paid staff and do all the great things we do now. But that's really how we started. And that was back in 2012. So this November, we'll be hitting 8 years.
Wow. That is amazing.
It is amazing.
I can't imagine the work that you guys have done over those 8 years and all of the people that you've met and all of the lives that you've impacted and changed. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
So I heard something that I wanted to touch on a little bit. You were talking about women in the sex industry that are generally overlooked. Can you speak on that a little bit more?
So often what we find in the movement of anti-trafficking is that often women in the sex industry are actually either being trafficked or potentially will be trafficked. And so I think a lot of times in our culture, we assume that everyone who's in the sex industry chose to be there, is making a lot of money, being taken advantage of, that sort of thing. And so we kind of see that as like a population that nobody really pays attention to. They kind of just assume, well, this is what they're doing. And so really building that rapport was one of the first things we did. We actually started working more in strip clubs than in the sex industry, getting to know some of the women there, hearing their stories, and just being a friend, being a voice. If they needed help, if they wanted options and they weren't given choices, knowing that they have some.
Yeah, that's definitely important. I think Phoenix and I, that's some of the work that we do as well, is just reaching out to people and helping them recognize that they have choices. Because when you feel like you're stuck in that place, and you don't have someone who has your back and those resources, it's so hard to get out of a situation. And I'm curious if you also might be able to define the sex industry, because you mentioned sex clubs, and I'm in my mind assuming also prostitutes. Is there more within that gamut?
Yeah, so within the sex industry, it's basically anything that's commercial sex. So whether that's being sold online for sex, whether that is pornography, whether that's strip clubs, online services and escort services, some of the illicit massage parlors, things like that.
So I have a question. So I guess my question is, you mentioned the sex industry. What other individuals or groups of people would you say are potential victims and who are vulnerable to these predators?
Absolutely. So the thing that we teach the most is that traffickers are aware of vulnerabilities. So any vulnerability is the type of thing that they're going to prey on. So obviously the more vulnerabilities, the more likely you're going to be vulnerable to trafficking or recruitment of trafficking. So some of the populations that we've worked with are definitely things like runaway youth, and women in detention centers, because often women in detention centers have a charge. Maybe they've shoplifted, but really they're under the coercion of a trafficker, or they're also very vulnerable to being trafficked. We also have worked with women in the homeless populations. Youth ages 12 to 18 years old are especially vulnerable. I mean, as y'all know, when we were growing up, when you're that age, you're figuring yourself out. You don't have your identity quite figured out. You're so impressionable. Peer pressure is big. You're learning yourself sexually. Like, all of that is happening in this little window of time. And so it's really a vulnerable time. We know that's a vulnerability. We also know, unfortunately, the LGBTQ plus population is very vulnerable to this as well. So honestly, any vulnerability that we can identify is something that a trafficker can identify too. And so foster care, children in DJJ, people that are in for us, it's DSS, which is Department of Social Services. I know it's different in every, area, but, juvenile justice and all of that, like any of that is going to be more vulnerable to these things. With children and youth group homes is another one where we actually see a lot of peer relationship there. We also have unfortunately seen some with special needs. Again, another vulnerability. And I've actually had 2 calls this week of concerns of 2 people that, are special needs that may be in the process of being recruited or trafficked. So all of that is really, common.
So I have a question, right? So you have this vulnerable child, and you some way persuade them to go along with whatever you're trying to do, right? So what do that process look like? What is sex trafficking? Does it mean that I'm getting passed around locally? Does it mean that I go from one state to another state? Can you walk through that process so we have a kind of a visual and understanding on what these victims and survivors are going through?
Sure. So the legal definition of trafficking is basically anyone who is in the sex industry, as we talked about, that is there because of force, fraud, or coercion. If it is an adult, one of those 3 things have to be present for it to be considered trafficking. Now, if it is a minor under the age of 18, none of that has to be present. There is never a time that a minor can consent to commercial sex. And so any time that we know a minor is, in any way in the commercial sex industry, it is immediately considered trafficking. When we talk about recruitment, that can honestly look like anything. It can look like a boyfriend recruiting his girlfriend. It could look like a best friend at school. It can look like, somebody in leadership, unfortunately. We've seen trafficking, with teachers, where teachers are people that are role models that use their position of power. Even churches, we've seen it within churches. It just, honestly, people using, again, the vulnerability of, being somebody in power and taking advantage of someone else. I mean, it's just, it's hard to even honestly box it in because every case looks so different.
Yeah.
But anytime that there's that coercion or manipulation or force or fraud, and somebody is now, having commercial sex with someone that they would not have chose to do without those elements involved, and money of some sort or something of value being exchanged is also obviously part of that. And what we always say is, like, it doesn't have to be money. It can be drugs. It can be shelter. It can be food. It can be anything. And we've seen a lot of different things that a lot of times are exchanged as well.
That's absolutely heartbreaking that, like you said, that it's, often, I don't know, often, but it has been role models and these people that, children look up to or that they trust. And like you said, in those formative years, being naive and that you do have that trust for adults. And I'm thinking about like the long-term effects of that too, being betrayed by somebody that you trust. So I was wondering if you might be able to speak on that a little bit too, because I know the statistics, like when it comes to rape or sexual abuse, for example, it's often someone who's very close to you, a family member or, a friend's parent or brother or sister, whatever. Do you find that that's a common theme with sex trafficking as well, that it's often somebody close to the child or individual?
Absolutely. I don't know the statistic, but I would say it's definitely 90% or more probably that it's someone that you've invited into their life. But honestly, it is so rare that we see trafficking where there's not a relationship that was there and that they weren't invited into their life for some reason. In fact, familial trafficking is a very common form of trafficking where it's mom, dad, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, somebody in their life that's even trafficking. So even some of the women we work with, when we talk to them, we find out their mom was their first trafficker when they were 7, and now here they are 20 years old, and they're still in this industry. And so, I think that's an important point to make, is that often it is people that are invited in. And so for us, a lot of times I know I hear all these things about abductions and kidnapping, and I'm like, that is not actually trafficking most of the time. Not to say it never has happened. We do know some that have had that as part of their story. So I definitely never want to say that doesn't happen or it never happens, but that is not the most common thing that we see when it comes to recruitment.
I know you deal with this on a day-to-day basis, and I just want to tip my hat off to you because as I listen to you, I'm over here just speechless. Like, wow. Thinking, because one, I have a daughter, I have a mother, and like Gina's my friend. I have women that I respect, and just from a human standpoint, like that's absolutely horrible. And I can't imagine. And I know it's just not something that happened to women. And I guess that's a question I have is, how often do you see male victims as well? Because I know you mentioned the LGBTQI plus community. Is that, do you see that often, like male victims as well being sex trafficked?
Yeah, so there's some mixed information, honestly, on men and how much we know that there's victims of males being trafficked. And honestly, I think part of it is because we're still learning a lot as a country. I've seen as high as up to 50% of victims are males as a stat.
Oh, wow.
And as low as 25%.
And that's a national average, or that's a
national
average?
Stat.
Okay, what about in South Carolina?
So here in South Carolina, this is kind of what we tell people, like, as our organization goes, we are willing to help men, but we in 8 years have never had a male case. And I think part of that is because there's still a stigmatism attached to a male being victimized. And so unfortunately, there's a lot of shame there. And so it's not as, we have worked so hard as a country, right, to empower women and to not victim shame and all that. Men are still, we're still having to work on getting it where it's safe for men.
We're still too masculine. We're still too macho. Yeah.
So I think we're still dealing with that as a country. And so unfortunately, we don't really know because of that. Obviously I know male survivors, I've met male survivors. I know it happens. But to know how often, I think it would really have to become a safer thing for men to be able to come out and say they've been victimized, for us to really get a grid on how often it happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good point.
That's you're totally right, though, that there is that stigma that exists for men, I mean, especially as a culture when it comes to sex, that, well, men are supposed to want sex, and, you're the more powerful one, and so how could you possibly be overpowered and all of that. Like it's got to be tough to be able to stand up and say that you were a victim. Like that's really hard.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about thinking around survivors being trafficked, often by those close to them. What are some common signs that you might be able to identify that somebody is being trafficked by somebody close to them?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say about that is I can give you some signs and some red flags because I think that's really important, but we really want to encourage people to pay attention to the story because like I said earlier, every single story looks so different that I could give a list of red flags and then we will, like the next day we'll see someone and none of the red flags were there, but it was trafficking. And so I just encourage people not to get too caught up on red flags, but some of the red flags is definitely that manipulative, coercive type relationship. I mean, that's just a red flag for a lot of things, but trafficking could definitely be one of them. Drug use is another, because what we see with drug use is whether it's a coping mechanism because they're in so much trauma, whether it's a control mechanism, because let's say, you know, if your trafficker is also your heroin supply, you're never going to leave because your body physically cannot, you know? And so drug use is really common. We've also seen though, like we've seen some individuals who actually are excelling in the middle of all this because for the first time somebody gave them attention. For the first time somebody's giving them, you know, giving them a boost in their self-esteem. So with students, you know, for some, their grades are going to drop. They're going to be, you know, not as attentive at school, but we have seen some where all of a sudden they're really attentive because they feel like they have this new boost of attention and somebody who's going to care and protect them, which honestly is just a sign of really great manipulation because they feel empowered by this false sense of trust and this false sense of protection. You know, we've seen things like tattoos where, you know, or even burn marks that are branding for that trafficking. So, you know, maybe that trafficker puts his name on her and says, you know, this is kind of my way of marking my territory or having some kind of ownership. We have seen, you know, obviously like being up at night, late at night, not coming home till late, not knowing where they are. You know, and then obviously just signs of trauma, you know, disassociation, you know, highly emotional or maybe showing out, you know, those kinds of things are always, you know, really important to pay attention to. But I really think it's that dynamic of just almost like something has shifted, you know, also more money, you know, possibly because one of the recruitment tactics we see is sometimes the trafficker gives a false sense of I'm taking care of you. So he is keeping most of the money, but he's spending some on her, you know, and so maybe she's getting high-end bags or she's getting her nails done and her hair done all the time because he's showing her a lot of attention to help kind of build that rapport. So those are just some, but I mean, there's a ton of red flags. And honestly, what I always tell everybody is if you get that gut feeling, you feel like something's off, if you see something, just say something, because even if it's not trafficking, it could be drug abuse, it could be domestic violence, it could be sexual assault. Like it's always important that we're a voice when we feel like something's off. And then you can let the professionals figure out what actually is going on, you know, but being that voice to just advocate for someone when they're in that situation is so important.
Yeah.
So I have to, I want to bring this up, Zaina. Like, so I'm from New York City, right? Okay. And I remember growing up in New York City. Gina, I don't know if you've been to New York City or not, but New York City now, if you go to like 42nd Street, look like Disney World, look like Orlando, right? Yeah. However, New York City, 42nd Street, when I was growing up, and I would say, let's say late 80s, early 90s, looked like pimps everywhere, big cars, prostitutes all over the place. It was a horrible scene. I remember my cousin taking me there, and that's exactly what I seen. And now listening to Zaina and looking at the Jeff Epstein Netflix series, I'm thinking in my head like, hey, that was prostitutes, like pimps and hoes, right? Like basically that was that era. So sex trafficking is basically pimps. So it's been around forever. And now that it's funny when I'm looking at the Jeff Epstein series, I'm looking at it from my lens now in 2020, like, oh my God, that's crazy. But in retrospect, I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, I grew up. That was like not normal because it wasn't bad. And I'm not saying it was, but I'm saying like, it was normal that
Yeah.
I seen it all the time, and I didn't see anyone making a stink about it. I didn't see any organizations. I seen cops riding past, and prostitutes was out there, and you see the pimps nearby, so you know that prostitute wasn't doing it on her own free will. So I'm asking, like, what was the change? Because for me, and this is perspectives, right? This is why we're here on the show. Gina, you could speak about it from your perspective. When you was growing up, Zaina, I don't know where you from, but like, what was the switch? Why does it now have the title of sex trafficking? Why is it a big awareness? Why are we paying so much attention to it now? What about those individuals that was being victimized back then? Why wasn't it a thing then? Why was it considered the norm?
Yeah, honestly, that is something I've thought about a lot, because I mean, literally 10 years ago, I still had that idea. Like, oh, that's just what people do. You don't really think about it. You know what I mean? Which is kind of crazy, right? If you think about it now, you just described it. And it's like, we literally would pass people and go, that's a pimp and a prostitute, and not think another moment of what kind of dynamic that must be for this man to be working with this woman. And so honestly, the only thing I could speak to is that our culture and our country have gotten more aware of what victimization looks like, and started to understand more about what trauma looks like, and understand more about like even that position of power. We see that with the Me Too movement. Like, we are talking about these issues more. We are making sure people understand that is not normal. And so unfortunately, I think we normalized it, which is kind of disgusting to think about now, knowing what we know now. But honestly, I think that's exactly what happened. And that's something we talk about a lot, is our culture, because quite honestly, those of us who are maybe like in our 40s and younger, it's a little bit easier for us to adjust and go, yeah, we understand what's going on here. But most people, when they grew up thinking it was no big deal that there's a pimp and prostitute at the corner, are still having a hard time understanding why that's not okay. And so it's important that we keep talking about it as a culture, so we can kind of shift the lens and help people understand what was going on and what still is going on.
Yeah,
absolutely. Very well put.
Yeah.
Very well put. What about you, Gina? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense. That it's just the awareness and the breaking down of those stereotypes. There's movies like Pretty Women, and you're like, oh, like women, they choose to do this, and they're doing it because they're, gold diggers, and that's like the quickest way to make some cash, So it's like, it's like the flip side, like the female flip side of like a drug dealer, like drug dealers, like that's just what they do, and they choose that life. That's and whatever.
They recruit the younger individuals, and they start to sell for them. So that just like, you have a boss and you have an employee.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But that shit is absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Absolutely.
So on the flip side of that, I am curious, because I know that there has been some talk around like prostitution, for example, and legalizing it and giving healthcare and making it a more like realistic and safe business for the women who do choose to do that. Because I guess I don't have any statistics to back it up, but I would think that there are women out there who are like, no, I enjoy this. This is what I do for work, and I would like to keep doing this. I'm not being coerced. This is my job. What is your opinion on that side of things?
Sure. So I am all for legalizing prostitution, because I think ultimately it makes it safer, whether they're choosing that life or they're being victimized. It's just going to make it safer. What I'm not for, and I think some of the legislation has considered, is things that would also make it okay to run a brothel. It would also make it okay for buyers to purchase sex. It would also make it okay for people to traffic, and just say, hey, we all just want to choose and we're all okay with this. So like, if a woman's like, I'm okay with this being my pimp, and then all of a sudden that's all of a sudden going to be legal too. There's a real fine line. And one of the things that I think is important to always remember when we talk about sex trafficking is Stockholm syndrome, which is now called trauma bond. That's a new name for it. But basically understanding that even if you're talking to someone.
Hold on, Gina, you threw that word out there.
Yeah, you want me to explain it?
Yeah, explain it for our audience that doesn't know what that is.
Yeah. So Stockholm syndrome, basically the term came from like a long time ago, where there was a bank robber and he held his victims hostage for like 24 hours or something. And then when law enforcement finally were able to break in and help, they were all loyal to the guy who had held them hostage. And and they were all fighting for his safety and his protection. And he was the one that was victimizing them and has kept them under hostage for 24 hours. And so what happens with human trafficking is the same thing. I have literally like met women, and there's even like videos and documentaries about it where you literally will hear them say like, he's not my trafficker. He is my boyfriend. I love him and I'm choosing this life. And you know good and well that is not exactly what's happening at all. But because of what happens psychologically with that coercion, it's so deep that there is a trauma bond there. And so I think we have to be careful when sex workers, like in general, are saying like, it's okay, I want to keep doing this, because we have to remember there's a piece of this that could also be speaking from their trauma right now and the coercion they're in. And so again, I'm really big on like legalizing the prostitution piece, but not the other pieces of the industry. And the reason I'm aligned that way is honestly because that's where survivors are aligned as well. Survivors who have come out of the industry, who are now healthy, empowered voices. I mean, they've written letters against that legislation and said, we do not want to see brothels and buyers and traffickers be able to legally continue the sex industry. And so, yes, we want to keep the women safe, but I think that the important thing, and something that I'm really big about too, is that the law be a teacher. And so honestly, 99% of buyers in the commercial sex industry are men. And so if we tell men it's okay to continue to buy sex, the industry is going to continue to grow and traffickers are going to continue to thrive. This is basic supply and demand. Okay, so if we go and say, yes, by law, let's just go ahead and make it all legal, trafficking is going to grow like crazy because we have basically made
legalized trafficking is going to actually make things worse. It won't.
Yeah, I think it'll make it worse because there's at least like this hidden like understanding that this isn't okay, and letting the law be the teacher and letting the law be something that holds people accountable to what's right and ethical. And so I think that, you know, being able to say it's okay and it's acceptable is just going to increase the appetite of buyers. We also know that pornography addiction, sex addiction is all psychological. It is just like having a drug addiction. So if we make I
have a question. So so say, and this is just me, right, throwing these bright ideas out there. Yeah. So say they legalize it, and instead of like brothels, you have something that's not government ran, but more so where it's protected. So where it's like, you know how salons or barbershops pay like a booth rent. So why they have like somewhere like safe for where women could like lease an area and it's safe and like it's ran by not the government, but some overseer that makes sure that there's not anyone, like everybody's independent and there's not anyone that's it's a pimp. It's hey, I'm working with this individual who has her own business or her own time slot or her own, you get what I'm saying? Like she's her own individual. Is that something that will alleviate that sex trafficking, but also keep the women safe, but also make individuals that want to pursue that career, give them the opportunity to pursue that career? I don't know. I'm not.
That's a good question. I think, if I'm honest though, I think the idea of it actually staying safe and it not becoming corrupt is like not likely. I mean, we get calls about police being the buyers of all this and driving some of this. So I just would never trust that. I think the other thing is what I was saying earlier is there are already 17 states in our country who have declared pornography a health crisis, because pornography has become such an addiction that, again, it's like an opiate addiction or another drug addiction. And so if we do things that help make it more accessible, I think in turn, we're just going to see the sex industry grow and trafficking continue to grow. And so I think I wouldn't be in favor of something like that, but I see what you're thinking. Like if we could somehow make it safe for people, sure.
Yeah, regulate it.
I just
like marijuana. I was thinking it from also like a marijuana thing. So we regulate it. We could try to. I don't know, and I know I'm probably going to get crazy amount of comments talking about what is he talking about. But I'm just trying to come with a solution. You know what I'm saying?
I think the thing I always say, and this is just again my belief though, when you're 7 or 8 years old and you're a little girl, you don't say, "I want to be a prostitute when I grow up."
No, definitely.
That's where I go, is this really what they want? Or is it that they're not empowered to do more? You know, like that's where
wait. But I play devil's advocate now.
Yeah, go ahead.
What about individuals that are strippers and they say, hey, like they grow up and they say, hey, I want to dance or I want to strip. Like we don't want to degrade that.
No, we don't.
Right?
For sure. No, we don't. I guess I just think it's a very fine line, and not knowing the whole dynamic, I think it's better to lean on the side of protecting those that are being victimized than the very few that may be in that situation. I think that's more of what we're looking at. I think
Yes.
the industry as a whole is more victimized than it is not, and so that's kind of the side I err on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
No,
that makes total sense.
Very much.
And I appreciate you answering our questions too, because I think that these are questions that a lot of people have, and like, well, what about this or what about that? And I think that those are great answers, and I think that there's also, to a point, no good answer, but it's about, like you said, trying to protect people and trying to get to a place of healing and options for people, and continuing that fight, so I really appreciate, like I said, like what you're doing and what your organization does to continue to reaching out people and saying like, hey, you may be stripping to put yourself through college. There's another way to put yourself through college, or, what have you. Like there are other options, and helping them to get access to those options.
Yeah, I think too, one of the things that I think I'd say too is, even when we work with women who have been victimized, a lot of times I hear that same argument. Like, I can think of one woman that I sat down with, and I said, she was like, I'm not a trafficking victim. She was like, I chose to prostitute. And I was like, okay, so what would have happened if you chose not to? And then she said, well, I think he would have hurt my sister. And I said, then that's not a choice. And so, see, that's what I'm dealing with on this other side of things, where I'm going, I don't know that that's always the case. When we dig a little deeper, we're seeing a lot more to that story. And I think with that psychological manipulation and that coercion that's happening, it's really hard to see on the surface what's actually happening, Yeah. So, yeah.
So I'd like to shift gears a little bit if we can. So can you kind of walk me through that process for you and your organization when someone does make that call, or you are able to identify someone who is possibly a victim? What happens from that point through that process? Because I'm putting pieces together, and I'm hearing a little bit of like, well, we sit down with those people, and it's like, do they have to make that choice? Do you like legally pull them out of it? What does that look like?
Yeah. So if it's an adult, it absolutely has to be their own choice and their time. We definitely, we could always call law enforcement and say, hey, there's a ring, or this is going on. But for that woman to want help, she has to make that choice. Obviously with minors, that's when for us, DSS, Department of Social Services, gets involved. So they don't really have a choice at that point of not getting the help they need. For us, really at that point, when they say, we want help, however we met them, however they found out about us, when that woman says she wants help, it becomes, a process where we sit down and our clinical director does an intake with them, just learns more about their situation, learns more about where they are, what kind of dynamics they're dealing with, what kind of drug addiction there could be present, where they're living, what's their, do they have safe people, all those kinds of things to kind of help us start to build rapport and figure out what's next. After that, it's really, our case management is extremely individualized. Partly because we want them to make choices. For the first time, they get to decide. They're in the driver's seat. And so we kind of look at it like, okay, these are some things that we can offer you. What would you like to do? What are the goals you want to have? So obviously there's things like drug detox, drug rehabilitation, going to long-term human trafficking shelters that are specific for women who have come out of this, that they can go to a 1 or 2 year program and just get away from their dynamics and get the healing they need. Trauma therapy, if they're looking to get their GED or build some job skills or get their resume built up, those are some options. We have mentors that we train as volunteers that they have the option of, if you want to be paired with somebody that can kind of be like your friend, and just walk along this with you and be that friend and that voice that you can talk to. And just as you walk through this process, we do a lot of classes. Obviously with COVID, it's been a little interesting, but we do art therapy classes, yoga classes, things like that they can participate and just have a healing, creative time for them to express themselves. Dance expression classes. We know that women who are in the industry, they want to keep dancing. And so we give them other ways they can do that, and so just all those kind of, there's just so much. There's so much. And, we just really try to figure out what they need and what they're looking for. For some, it's being back in relationship with their children, through the process, they've lost relationship with their children. For some, it's expungement of the charges, because there's great laws that expunge the charges you may have if you are under the control of a trafficker. So we work towards that,
Right.
So it's just whatever they need, you know.
How do y'all do that? Do y'all have like lawyers on staff, or do y'all have lawyers that's like partnership with your organization?
Yes, we really are big on partnership. We could not possibly offer everything that we want to offer. And so honestly, what we do is we build partnerships with local organizations. We train them on trafficking. And, you know, this way it is something that we can work together. And so we know who does what. You know, we have all the trauma therapists we work with, go through training with us to make sure they understand the type of trauma we're working with. You know, so everybody that goes through, anybody that we work with, we have partnered with, and we've gotten to know them on some level before they work with them. But yeah, we just have a lot of great partnerships.
Awesome.
That's amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, it is. It is. So I only could imagine that you were going, like being in your position, that you helped so many survivors through that journey. I guess my question would be, in doing that, what survivor did you, and of course, no names, but what survivor were you attached to the most? And can you provide us a quick rundown of their story and what happened and the reason why you were so attached to that individual?
There's a lot, honestly. I mean, obviously, over the years, you meet so many. I actually am thinking of one right now that I still just always tugs on my heartstrings. She's actually currently still in jail. She's going to be in jail for several more years because of some charges that are unrelated, but related, as we know, with trauma, it's all related. But just some of the dynamics I know were, you know, some what we call survival trafficking. And so that's a lot of times where maybe you've been trafficked before and now you're trafficking yourself because you don't know how to survive.
Oh,
so
wow.
There's a lot of that in her story. Her brother, I know, had died tragically. There's just lots of dynamics that happened that got her to her breaking point. And so when she came to us, she was so hungry for help. And that's the hard thing, is knowing she's in jail, but actually she really wants to be out and free. Like, she's working her steps while she's in jail, you know? But she's one that I think about a lot as someone that, like, really just honestly, our whole staff has got really connected to her. There's so many, and I don't tell lots of details because it could be identifying to people on the other end, you know, like maybe I won't
totally understand.
But, you know, there's just so many that their dynamics, you know, we have one that just recently, you know, because of her situation, you know, has lost custody of her children. And so, like, even those things, those after effects of what has happened, people don't think about that a lot. You know, we always think about the initial trauma. Okay, when the trafficker did X, Y, Z, and that whatever sounds, you know, most horrific or whatever, but we forget, like, the effects of trauma years after. And I think those are the things that sometimes even hold on to us even more as a staff, because those are the things that, when all the, you know, excitement of the story to other people are gone, we're still noticing all these effects and all the ripples of their trauma, and how they're still having to walk out 3, 4, 5, 6 years later what somebody did to them that they didn't have any choice to change, you know? And I think that's important for people to remember. But those things, I think, as a staff, we tend to hold on to those things a lot, because we know that they are continuing to be resilient through all of it and continuing to be overcomers through so much more than even that initial story that everybody, you know, identifies with.
Yeah. It's funny because hearing you talk about these stories, even just briefly, I can see not only your passion, but also your strength in what you do, you know, because it takes both. It takes that empathy and that love and that care, but also the strength to be able to help people and watch them go through it. It's so hard. So I'm wondering, what do you do for yourself to kind of help yourself through the day or the weeks or the years as you continue to pour your heart into this work?
Sure. Yeah. So we really try to value self-care as a staff. That is really important to us. So we try to do things like, we try to do a 35-hour work week instead of a 40-hour work week. Now, I'll be honest, it's not as often that I get to do that, but I try my best. I have permission to, and even that's good to feel sometimes. But try to keep that work week shorter. Definitely try to be generous with our paid time off so we can take days to be with our families. We provide, you know, some counseling for every one of our staff members so that we can continue to self-care and stay healthy. And honestly, just be there for each other. I think when you have camaraderie with each other, it's a little easier to walk through the harder stuff. For us too, is our faith. We are a faith-based organization, so that's really important to us, and that helps get us through a lot of it too. is just knowing we have hope and there's joy, and not everything has to stay like here. We know there's hope. We know there's a better end, and so I think that helps us a lot to get through it.
So one big question that I had, because I don't know a ton about this, but I know that it's made news in years past, and then people have talked about it, is the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And the Super Bowl being a huge place.
Gina, don't hit him with that question.
And a lot of people don't know that. I didn't know that until more recent years, that it is basically a huge event for sex trafficking to take place. Can you speak on that at all, and kind of just generally your thoughts on that?
Sure. So what we basically, as I mentioned earlier, 99% of buyers are males. And so the way we explain it is, anytime there's a large group of men having a lot of fun, maybe being away from their families, it is more likely that the industry is going to be increased and trafficking is going to happen. So whether it's the Super Bowl, whether it's some other sporting event, no matter what it is, there's an increase. Obviously, the Super Bowl is huge, so we're going to see it more there than anywhere else. There's always lots of efforts put in with a lot of national organizations to help support aftercare after the Super Bowl. So a lot of our friends in the movement will be planning, depending on where you are and what city you're in and where the Super Bowl is. We'll always pull in as a movement the right resources to help support. But I think one of the things I always try to encourage people, though, is not to start to think that trafficking just happens at Super Bowls and big events. But that's a lot of times what will happen. Like, people will hear about Switch and they'll say, oh, so you guys work when the Super Bowl's going on. And I'm like, no, every single day trafficking's happening, but the Super Bowl will definitely draw more. And like I said, I think anytime a group of men are gathered together, it's just going to be likely that there's going to be more trafficking, and the Super Bowl definitely will do that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely makes sense. That makes sense. So earlier you mentioned that your organization started because a group of you all locally got together and say, you know what, this is something that we're passionate about. So y'all volunteer and you say, hey, we have to make a change.
Yeah.
Did that motivation come from individual experience? Is this something that you all victims and survivors of sex trafficking, or do y'all have family members? Where did that passion and that motivation stem from?
Yeah, I think some of it definitely came from our faith, and some of it did come from experience. Several of us, whether it was sexual assault, sex trafficking, just anything even close to that kind of touches it. We find a lot, even the people that volunteer with us, a good portion, they have their own personal stories because we can relate. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the ACE study, but basically it's adverse childhood experiences that happen within your childhood. And there's 10 different things that can happen in your childhood. And the more that you have those different traumas, the more likely you are to be vulnerable. And so for a lot of people, it's just knowing I relate because I've been through some adverse childhood experiences, or I've been through some things even as an adult, and now I understand why these women are where they are. And I understand that it could have only been one different thing for it to be me too. But we do have survivors that also come and work in our organization that get connected as well. Honestly, though, sometimes we have people who come to us and think they maybe are a survivor of sexual assault and sexual abuse. And then when they come through our organization, they then realize and identify that it actually was trafficking.
Wow.
There's just not a lot of education out there. And so as you start to realize, okay, this is actually what it looks like. That is actually what happened to me. That has happened several times where people have been drawn to the organization and then learned that they too are survivors.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I guess my question is, because I know Gina personally, we're life coaches, right? And Gina's specialty and her niche is around women empowerment and boundaries. And that comes from personal experiences to make her want to empower women in those areas. My experience, I'm a life coach, and it's through life transition, and my specialties, either life transitions that I personally transition through, or transitions, one is transitioning through out the closet for the LGBTQI+. I'm heterosexual, but I wanted to make an impact and create change in that area. So that's the reason why I have that as a specialty. So I guess my question for you is, did you experience this personally, or what is your personal passion and reasoning?
For me, I am not a sex trafficking survivor. However, I am a survivor of sexual abuse. And I am someone who grew up in a very dysfunctional and abusive environment. And so for me, my story is like one shift in my life, and I could have easily been one of these women. One person, if one person would have known my vulnerability, that would have been me, hands down. And so I think that for me, that's why I can identify and feel that connection, because I also know what it's like to walk the path of healing. I'm not what the statistics assume that I would be. If you look at my adverse childhood experiences, I'm 8 out of 10. And so for a lot of people, they would go, yeah, well, then you should be X, Y, Z. You should be all these things. And I'm not. And it's because I was able to walk that journey of healing. So I know it's possible for other women too.
Awesome.
I just want to say that I relate to that 100%. I am also a survivor of rape when I was a child. My ACEs score is also 8 out of 10. And it changed the way that I viewed things when my therapist said, by all means, you should not be here.
Yes.
Like you should have gotten pregnant when you were 16. You should have ended up in jail or on drugs or frankly dead. Like there statistically is not an answer for why you have a full-time job, a husband, a child in the house. Like that is not a thing that you should statistically have.
A credible, independent, strong woman. Throw those in there as well. Gina, come on. Keep throwing on the accolades and patting yourself on the back. She's very modest.
But also, I mean, like beyond just my own personal ability to do whatever, like it is a little bit of a miracle in that sense. Like I don't know why I am where I am or how I am where I am. And like you said, it is just the other side of the coin that I could have been in these positions. It so easily could have been me. And then, I think about how that would have affected my family or, all of these other people that are connected to me, and how it can devastate so many people's lives when these traumas happen to people. So it's just, I think, like you said, being able to relate to that on such a personal level, even if you haven't gone through that specific thing, having somebody to talk to who can still relate to you, and who has done the work of healing is so, so, so important. And so I just, from my heart to yours, thank you so much for everything that your organization does, because I could have been one of those women coming to your organization and asking for help. Having that resource available, when Phoenix was growing up, like that, it wasn't a thing. It was unheard of. And now that we have these resources to be able to give women other choices and that support that they need is so powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree. So I guess my next question for you is, what's next for Switch? What are y'all doing that's innovative? What's next? How can they reach y'all? I know we're going to have your links. We have your links and everything at the bottom of the screen. People that's listening, the links are available as well. Please click if you're interested or if you want to support Switch. But Zaina, like, what's next for your organization? What's going on in the future?
Yeah. So our first, I think, big goal is we actually want to have a man to be able to come on staff and help us tackle the demand issue. Often, we hear all the time about, pornography addiction and sex addiction, but where are the resources? And most men are not intentionally trying to victimize women. Most men are just, thinking this is a victimless crime. And so having someone that can be someone that's approachable, that can provide resources to men who are struggling is really important to us, because we believe human trafficking, we can't just, help the women that are being victimized. We have to consider all the other pieces so that we don't get to this point. And so that's one of them. And so I think that is really kind of our next big goal, is to develop a program for men so that men don't have to continue to feed this cycle because there's nowhere to get help and resources when they are in that process.
Yeah, that's amazing. And kind of going back to what you said earlier of like, you talk to a little girl and, rarely ever would you ever find a little girl who's like, I want to grow up to be a prostitute. I think same for little boys. Like rarely ever would you talk to a little boy who's like, I want to grow up to be addicted to pornography or like, hire a stripper. Like that's not a thing that they do, but getting to the core of that problem. So you don't have victims because victimization isn't happening. I love that that's your mission. And for any of our listeners or viewers who would like to support this mission and also believe in it, again, click that link, support Switch in what they're doing, because what they're doing is so important.
Definitely. I think that's awesome that what you said. I'm a caveat to what you said and what Gina was giving you accolades for. I think that's amazing. And I think some men and individuals in general do not understand that we are breeding, society, when I say we, society is creating and breeding these monsters because at the end of the day, it's a culture thing. So we don't think we're victimizing, I'm saying men don't think that they victimizing these individuals because of this culture that they're trying to be a part of.
Yeah.
Or they're addicted to. So I guess going in deeper, until you have a male on staff, what is your suggestion to our viewers that is male? How can they be proactive in being aware or raising awareness and pushing that message for you and others like your organization?
Yeah, so I think it's important to mention that with pornography, statistically, 49% of victims of trafficking had pornography made of them while they were being trafficked. So I think it's important to have that like kind of mindset of this is why pornography is harmful, because it's not always that there's somebody that's just making money and is a porn star and doesn't actually be victimized in the process. The other piece about pornography is understanding it's almost like a gateway drug to the addiction. And so it may start with just pornography use, but it turns into, but that's not enough. And now I need to go to the strip club. And now that's not enough. And now I need to purchase sex. And so I think to help connect all of those pieces is helpful because then men can understand and be a voice to other men when they see those patterns. And I think too, because who knows who will listen to this and what area you're in, but if there is men that are struggling with this, I think the first thing to do is look for, a sex addiction therapist in your area or a sex addiction. There's like sex addiction anonymous groups everywhere. Get help and don't feel shameful about it because honestly, it's okay. You got there, but now how do you get out of it? I think that's the biggest thing. And know that it's okay to get help. It's okay to talk about it. It's not, we don't want to shame men that struggle with this, and women struggle with it too. Let me be clear, but I just know statistically it's 99% are males, but no matter who it is, women or men, if this is something you struggle with, get help because there is help available and you can break that addiction. And in doing that, you can also help not continue the victimization of others.
Nice. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. At this time, Zaina, we're going to go into our favorite part of the show. At least that's mine. It's called the Thing of the Week. Without further ado, this is my Thing of the Week. So my Thing of the Week is going to be influenced by our conversation today. My Thing of the Week is I'm going to ask you, the viewers and the listeners, to do this. And our efforts to help Zaina and individuals like Zaina and her organization push the message of awareness for sex trafficking. I asked you, what are you doing locally or nationally to raise your awareness? Are you contributing to organizations like Zaina's? Are you contributing to businesses that help or employ victims of sex trafficking? Or are you just volunteering your time or your knowledge and Googling things that's going to inspire you to push her message or push that message? I challenge you all, the listeners and the viewers, to do your part in raising awareness for this serious topic. Coach Phoenix, role model life coaching. Thank you. Gina?
I love it. Again, your Thing of the Week is always so hard to follow. But my Thing of the Week is an anonymous quote that says, how you love yourself is how you teach others to love you. So I think that kind of ties into this conversation about knowing your worth and knowing your options, and that starting in your heart and in the core of you, and knowing that it is about your boundaries. It is about how you let other people treat you. It is about what you want with life. And it all starts right at home, right with you. And you have the power, no matter your situation, no matter your condition, no matter any of it, you can get to where you want to go.
Absolutely beautiful. Zaina, Gina always have these powerful quotes that just have you thinking. After I get up the show, she had me thinking for at least 10 minutes, like, man, that was deep. But individuals, thank you for everything. Audience, I hope you enjoyed this show and this audio as much as I did. Zaina, thank you so much for what you're doing, your hard work and your efforts in the state of South Carolina and what you do nationally. We appreciate you. viewers. We love y'all. Thank y'all for joining us. Until next time, Coach Phoenix, Coach Gina, switch. Toast with the coaches. We out. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.